The Public Safety Committee is now called to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd, Alderman Vaquero, Alderman Cone, Alderman Ornowitz,
Present.
Alderwoman Hubbard,
Present.
Alderman Coder,
Here.
Alderwoman Spencer, Alderman Muhammad,
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd,
Present.
Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
6 present, you have quorum.
We do have several of the committee members in the Legislation Committee meeting. So at this point, they may make it over here. If not, would you please excuse them? That would be Vaccaro and Boyd at this point. We have 2 items on the agenda today, Board Bill 109, and then a review of the Close the Workhouse report. As I mentioned to the representatives from the association, we will first start with the board bill. Alderman Muhammad, that Board Bill 109.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for hearing Board Bill 109 this morning. In the interest of time, I will be extremely brief. Board Bill 109 is a pretty simple bill. It creates and designates a youth task force focused on studying the obstacles as it relates to education and employment opportunities in disenfranchised communities. It charges the Board of Aldermen and the Mayor's office to come up with realistic recommendations for the approval of educational success in advancing opportunities for economic prosperity in North City and in South City and parts of these disenfranchised communities. This task force is only valid for 1 year. At the end of the year, it will present its findings and its recommendations to the Board of Aldermen, to the President, and to the Mayor's office. And from that point, the Mayor's office and the appropriate divisions or departments of city government should make the necessary changes or recommendations to improve the quality of life for people in these communities.
We can take any questions from members of the committee. Alderman Ornowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Alderman. So basically what we're doing is we're giving them a year to study which better ways we can use money to educate our youth, which is always a great thing, I just feel like personally over the years, the state has failed us with helping educate our children. As you know, they're in charge of schools, and me being a lot older, I can remember every summer going to public schools and having something to do, which we have nowhere near that nowadays. So if we can figure out how to help our youth, educate them, and give them something to do to keep them from hanging out on corners and everything else, and I'm all for it. So you have my support on this bill, and I appreciate this.
Hey, thank you so much, Alderman. One thing, and I agree with 100%, the state has failed us in more than one way. And right now, just looking at city government, we have different departments and agencies doing their own thing, but trying to come up with solutions for the same problem, and that's make St. Louis better and improve quality of service and life and overall community development. And what this task force does is bring these departments together, whether it's human services or whether it's Slate or whether it's the Director of Public Safety's office. It brings them all together to come up with realistic solutions to make St. Louis better as it relates to education and economic opportunities. So thank you, Alderman.
And that makes sense, everybody getting on the same page with ideas so to better help our youth growing up. So, we want them to learn, be educated, and have something to do, and also at a young age get some skills on job training. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First, I'd like to commend you on your efforts for putting this together, but it's just my hope that we actually do something with it. For, you know, so many years and so many times we establish these committees and stuff and these boards, and I mean, it's a think tank, and then it's a meeting after another meeting after another meeting, and really we don't see any results with it. But it's my hope that establishing this board or committee, however it's structured, that there's some true effort into putting funding in place so that we can do what we need to do to address the issues that are facing the youth in our community. And after that, I would hope that we can see some follow-up on results and stuff, because a lot of times we put RFPs out there and then we give money to token organizations and we never really see the impact of it. So it's my hope that we definitely follow through with this, because there's definitely a need for it in our community. And as I stated earlier, thank you for your efforts. No further questions.
Thank you, Alderwoman.
Alderman Coulter?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Alderwoman Spencer?
I don't really have any questions, Mr. Chairman, but I commend the effort. I think this is a great idea. Well, I guess I do have maybe just a question as far as resources that the task force would have. I noticed there's not a fiscal note. Was there any staffing or any city resources that would aid the task force in any way to
No.
achieve their goals?
Absolutely not. I mean, independently now, when you look at the second page, it pretty much identifies who will be on this task force. Independently, they all have resources dedicated to this very same thing. And all it's doing is combining those resources to come up with solutions at a collective, and not doing it in everybody's own silo.
I'm always impressed with what citizens are willing to commit on a volunteer basis to make their city a better place. So I commend the effort.
One.
Alderwoman Boyd?
No questions.
Okay. You're recognized to close on your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I close, and I will ask that the committee do pass this out where they do pass recommendation.
At this point, then, we can entertain a motion.
So moved. I move that we adopt Board Bill 109 with due pass recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt Board Bill 109 with a due pass recommendation. Is there any discussion on the motion? I'm trying to allow the alderman to come on in.
Don't.
No, no discussion. With that, we're taking a vote on 109. With that, we will, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd?
Stay.
Alderman Vaquero? Alderman Cone? Alderman Ornowitz?
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard?
Aye.
Alderman Coulter?
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad?
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd?
Aye.
Chairman Kennedy?
Aye.
You have 7 aye votes and 1 abstain.
109.
Can I still be an aye then? Or it's just crossing over from another meeting?
Alderman Vaquero?
That would be an aye.
8 aye votes and 1 abstain.
By your vote, we sustain the motion. Board Bill 109 is passed out with a due pass recommendation.
And Mr. Chairman, could you have the clerk add my name as a co-sponsor?
Anyone else that's interested in placing their name, just let the clerk know. Now we have before us an opportunity to review the public report that was made about closing the workhouse. 2 weeks ago, the committee reviewed with CABCOR, the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression, reviewed the concepts of revisioning public safety. One of the aspects of revisioning public safety included reform to the justice process here in the city. This is a expression of, this particular report is an expression of revisioning public safety. And so we'd like to bring up, Mr. Montega? Okay. So would you please come up and just identify yourself, who you're with, and then you can begin your presentation. Are there others to come up as well?
Yeah, we'll have 4 total. And
4
I'll
total?
introduce them.
Okay, then you introduce it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Higgins. I'm on the organizing team for the Close the Workhouse campaign. I'm also honored to serve as the director of Faith for Justice, which is a local advocacy group that informs and encourages people of faith to enter into Black liberation movements. So you probably all are excited about the Christmas season approaching, and we enter a time in which we start to look at old stories. The Christmas Carol is one of my favorites. Ebenezer Scrooge is visited by an old friend who drags chains behind him. Jacob Marley says, "Scrooge, learn from my own mistakes and return to what you used to be, cheerful, excited, understanding and knowing that the more you give, the more you will receive." I feel similarly that the city of St. Louis is in a time when someone has to drag some chains to remind them that we have an opportunity to give, specifically around mass incarceration. You'll hear from a ghost of Christmas past to discuss how long and tiring mass incarceration has been around the nation, but specifically in our city, around pretrial detention and money bail. You'll hear from a ghost of Christmas present, someone who has suffered the indignities, the injustice of the sheer inhumanity of the conditions in the workhouse, the medium security institution. And then you'll hear from a ghost of Christmas future, our vision for what we could do, what we should do, how we can live if we mark the words of the people who are suffering inhumane conditions now. And so if you feel like I'm calling you Ebenezer Scrooge, you'll have to forgive me, but I am calling myself Jacob Marley. I was born in St. Louis City Hospital number 1 in 1981. I was raised to believe that no matter what, if you dream and get educated and achieve, you can have whatever you would like. And then I was informed that, sadly, it doesn't matter what you do. It matters what you do with what you have. And so I am excited to present to you in order Mike Milton from the Bail Project, who will inform you of cash money bail, Inez Bordeaux, who is one of our core organizers of Close the Workhouse and a member of our team, and then Blake Strode, who is one of our executive sponsors for the Close the Workhouse campaign and the executive director of Arch City Defenders. Good morning.
So I'm the ghost of Christmas past. How y'all doing?
All right, then.
So my name is Mike Milton. I'm the site director of the Bail Project STL, right? So Bail Project is a national effort. Can we, a little bit? Thank you. All right. So the Bail Project is a national effort, right? So we operate in 9 states. The goal is to attack cash bail from a disruption point of view, right? And so we landed in St. Louis. We particularly target cities and jails with the highest incarceration rates in the nation. The workhouse just happened to be 96% all pretrial. So that means 96% of this jail is all convicted of nothing. They've all been just charged. And the charge, we got to remember that a charge is just an accusation, right? It's not actually conviction. So how this works is that we have a bail fund, right? We have a large donation. We post the bail. The person goes to court. We put up the money for them. They go to court. At the end of the case, we receive the money back, and it's a revolving fund, right? So that's how that works. Go to the next slide. So what are the consequences of cash bail? Bail was originally intended as an incentive for people to come back to court. What it has become is that people who cannot afford to put up the money, they end up just sitting in jail until the end of their trial. The average stay of the workhouse is 291 days. Remember, these are innocent people, and the average stay is almost a year, right? So what's the consequences? What happens? The loss of wage and the loss of income and wages, the loss of housing, restricted access to counsel, loss of physical or legal custody of children, and an increase of mental illness symptoms, increased risk of sexual assault, especially within the first 3 days, desperate results in criminal cases, increased recidivism, and this is the one that I want to really land home on. They're coerced to plead guilty just to go home. right? They want to go home. They want to be with their family. Pretrial, right now, during the 2-year period in the city of St. Louis, 90% of the people held in jail because of unaffordable cash bail has pled guilty to misdemeanor charges. 84% of those people do not have legal representation. So they're just pleading, they don't even have an attorney, they're just pleading because they want to go home. They could be innocent or guilty. One of the most impacted stories that I've seen, because I'm in the workhouse almost every day, but one of the most impacted stories that I've seen is a young woman who was 4 months pregnant, and she was in there for a charge on an attempt to pass a bad check. Her bond was $350. She was in there for 62 days. 62 days. Once we post her bail, her landlord changed the locks and locked all of her possessions inside of the house. Her car was repossessed, and her kids were in Minnesota. She literally came out poorer and more at risk than what she was before she went in. In July, her cases were dropped. They did not convict her of anything. That's 95% of the people in the workhouse, right? So there's 2 points I want to land. I'm gonna skip through all of these. There's 2 points I want to land. The Bail Project St. Louis exists to debunk the myth that cash bail is necessary. It's not, right? The second one is that we also believe that public safety should not exclude people held on bail. When we talk about public safety, we're often excluding people who are in jail. They deserve the same amount of safety as everybody else, right? Go to the next slide. So what does this mean for the workhouse? I already talked about 95% of the workhouse is pretrial. Cash bail in our region disproportionately affect communities of color, right? 49% of St. Louis is black, but the incarcerated population of the workhouse is 89% black. This is racist. Cash bail is racist, right? Next point, not only are the vast majority of people in St. Louis custody incarcerated on bond, but bonds amount are much higher in St. Louis. This is also a problem. Compared to our other states, can we go to the next slide? St. Louis is way behind in how we deal with cash bail. New York, 60% of New York have all released on recog. Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. But look at St. Louis. We're just locking people up. What's the next slide for me? So our data, what have we found, right? We found, since January 2018, we bailed out a little over 1,100 people between the 3 jails. This is a really important key. 94% of our people have returned back to court without cash being an incentive. So we're putting up the money. If cash bail was initially an incentive for people to come back to court, we've actually proved that people want to fight their case. 94% of our clients have all returned. That 6% has been split between inaccurate notification from the court, right? Like unhousedness, can't get in touch with them, or they have been back in jail, but 94% of the people have returned back. 46% of our clients were able to post bond within the first 3 days of incarceration, allowing them to keep their jobs in their homes. 62% of our clients meet medical standard for having diagnosable substance abuse. Over half of our clients have been medically diagnosed with mental illness. 44% of our clients with closed cases are found not guilty or amended. Right, so this is like actually happening. We're proving that this system is not necessary. We're also proving that there's no need for a jail like the workhouse. Last slide. So what's our summary? Cash bail and other digital incarceration is not necessary to get St. Louis back to court. The workhouse is full of innocent and sick, poor St. Louis, not criminals. Incarcerating the addicted, the mentally ill, and the unhoused because of their inability to pay weakens our city. As a city, we have to find more creative and compassionate ways to lower crime. That's where we at. That's why we exist. That's why we joined this effort, because it's overwhelmingly affecting people in our city, and the workhouse just happen to be a hub of poor people. And we have to think about other ways to deal with this.
Good morning. My name is Inez Bordeaux. I'm an LPN here in St. Louis. I'm also one of the team members on the organizing team for the Close the Workhouse campaign. I am also an impacted person that's been in the workhouse, and I'm here to talk to you today about my experience there. Again, my name is Inez Bordeaux, and I'm here because I want to close the workhouse and not open another one. What led me to be in the workhouse in March of 2016 was a probation violation. What led me to be on probation was a 7-year journey through the Missouri criminal justice system, where myself and 12,000 other people were improperly charged and prosecuted under a law that no longer exists, thanks to the Missouri Supreme Court. It's a much longer story for another day, but know that I lost everything. I lost my house, my car. I had to send my children away because I was homeless for 3 years. And through all of that, I never once gave up hope. I never once felt like I wasn't going to make it to the other side until I went to the workhouse. It's a hopeless, desperate place. Hopeless. You can smell it when you walk in. I thought that that smell that I was smelling in the workhouse was a hopelessness. It turns out it's just mold. That's the smell that I was smelling. It settles on you like a wet blanket that you can't take off. That 30 days I spent in the workhouse was the most traumatic experience of my life. And I say that as someone who has been in jails all over this city. Both as a nurse, I've worked in a lot of the jails in the St. Louis area, and I also had a problem paying my traffic tickets when I was in my 20s. So I spent a lot of nights in a lot of municipalities for traffic tickets. The conditions of the workhouse are inhumane, and it is unconscionable that in 2018, we are allowing humans to be in that facility. Water leaking on a near constant basis from the ceiling. Rats that run through the facility unchecked. The roach infestation. The toilets that don't flush. And the showers that can't be used because of the sewage backup. The food that smells bad and looks even worse. The poorly trained guards, the inadequate medical care, the non-existent mental health services. For 30 days, I was at the workhouse for 30 days. In that 30 days, I watched as black mold grew across the wall in our pod. I watched as women picked roaches out of their food. I watched as correctional officers with no medical experience or training were left in charge of triaging women with medical conditions and then determining if they deserved medical treatment. I watched as women were told to roll up toilet paper when they ran out of feminine hygiene products. I watched as women were told to make do when we ran out of toilet paper. I personally experienced the effects of not having mental health professionals on staff. When I first arrived at the workhouse, I was deemed a suicide risk because I was sad about being in jail and I was crying. I was deemed a suicide risk, and then I was taken to a solitary confinement cell and left there for 3 days. As someone with 20 years of medical experience, 12 as an LPN, 2 as a medical assistant, and 5 as a CNA, I can tell you that that is not how you deal with someone who is a suicide risk. We all know about the extreme temperatures in the workhouse, 15 to 20 degrees hotter in the summer, 15 to 20 degrees colder in the winter. Because of mold in the ventilation system and asbestos in the boilers, they can't turn on the heat. We all know there's no air conditioning in the workhouse. Putting air conditioning in the workhouse would be like putting lipstick on a pig. The workhouse cannot be saved. It is irredeemable. It cannot be saved. I know some of you and your colleagues here on the Board of Aldermen have been on VIP tours of the workhouse, and some of your colleagues are quoted as saying, "It's not that bad." Public Safety Director Jimmy Edwards is also quoted as saying, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the things that you've heard in the workhouse. I dare Jimmy Edwards, you, or any of your colleagues to say it to my face. Tell me to my face that the things that I saw, the things that I experienced in the workhouse aren't that bad, that they aren't true, that they're hyped up, that they're hyperbole. I dare any of you to tell me that my lived experience of watching 50 women languish in a pod in a facility not fit for human habitation is hype. I dare you, any of you. 2 years later, my life is back on track. The felony probation that landed me in the workhouse was overturned. My nursing license was reinstated, and my children are back at home. But that 30 days has radicalized me. It has changed me. And so when I say that I want the workhouse to be closed, don't misunderstand me. I'm not asking. It is not a request. I am demanding it. I am demanding that people being held in that facility not safe for human habitation be closed. I'm demanding it on behalf of Gerald, who was there for 5 days. And because of his medical condition and inadequate medical care, he almost died. I'm demanding that it be closed for Deidre, who spent 28 days in the workhouse because she couldn't afford to make a $100 bail. I'm demanding it be closed for Janice, who missed her daughter's pregnancy because she was in the workhouse sitting, waiting to fight a case that she could have fought from home. I'm demanding that the workhouse be closed for the thousands of St. Louisans who have languished in that facility. Who have languished in the most inhumane, impossible conditions. Because this city criminalizes being poor. Because this city does throw people away. The city does not care, and it's evident right down on Hall Street that the city doesn't see poor people as humans, as deserving, as worthy. I will not stop. I feel safe in speaking for the Close the Workhouse campaign when I say we will not stop. The fight doesn't end until the workhouse is closed, period. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Blake Strode. I'm the Executive Director of Arch City Defenders and partner on the Close the Workhouse campaign. I think Michelle called me the ghost of Christmas future, but I'm going to linger a little longer in the present for a minute and talk about the sort of broad scale effects of our investment in places like the workhouse. Can you go to the next slide? So I want to start here. I want to start by talking about what this looks like from a budgetary perspective. So I imagine all of you have spent a lot more time with the city budget than I have, but this is a snapshot of the general fund budget for the city of St. Louis for the last fiscal year. And what you see there in highlighted in yellow is the portion of our budget that goes to public safety, a portion of the general fund budget that goes to public safety, which is around 63%. But I think what's most important about that number is it's very narrowly defined, so that 84% of that 63% goes to three things: police, prosecution, and jails. So that the notion of public safety that we've adopted as a city is really one that revolves around this system of arresting and incarcerating. And part of what we're pushing for is a much broader notion and broader conception of public safety. But this has had real effects. Can you go to the next slide? So obviously this is very small, so let me explain what you're looking at. The title there says World Incarceration Rates if Every U.S. State Were a Country. The orange bars that you see, those are the only countries on that chart. Everything else on that chart is a U.S. state, and this is the top, this is where it starts. Missouri is about 10 bars down, the 10th highest incarceration rate in the world. Then the first orange bar is the United States of America. The next one you get to is El Salvador, Turkmenistan, Cuba. The last orange bar is Russia, way down there at half, less than half the incarceration rate that we have right here in the state of Missouri. And the city of St. Louis has the highest incarceration rate in the state of Missouri. So this really is a crisis. This is what, from an international standpoint, a crisis looks like. The levels at which we are locking people up is unprecedented anywhere in the world. Can you go to the next slide? This is another perspective of the same thing. The Missouri and the United States compared to sort of developed world, the NATO countries, the countries that we see ourselves as being in league with and share certain democratic values and investment in our people and society. Well, you see what this looks like compared to places like the UK and France and Italy. Again, completely out of proportion with the rest of the world. Next slide, please. So this is what we're calling for. We're calling for a shift in what we call public safety. And right now, public safety, as I said, is police, it's jails, it's a punitive court system, arresting and incarcerating people. And what we're really pushing for and have laid out in the report that you have is a vision of public safety as community well-being, investment in things that actually create opportunities, healthier, safer communities through opportunity. Next slide. So there are really 4 pillars of this vision, and there's more detail around these in the report. But the 4 pillars are, 1, affordable housing. As I think Michelle or Mike said earlier, a huge percentage of the people in the workhouse are either homeless or experiencing housing insecurity, meaning that they could lose their homes at any given moment if they miss a paycheck, if they're held in a jail cell for a few days and can't go to work. We know that the ability to be rooted, to be in a stable, affordable, safe housing is critical to living opportunity-rich lives and avoiding involvement in the criminal legal system. So investment in housing is something that we desperately need. Second, mental health care, and really health care more generally. Just like many people in the workhouse and other jails are housing insecure, many also have serious health issues, whether it's mental health issues or substance abuse issues. And these are not problems that can be resolved by throwing someone in a cage. And in fact, when we throw them in a cage, we make those problems much worse. What we need is a deeper investment in health systems in this region that actually treat people in moments of crisis. Third, economic and educational opportunities. You were just talking about a board bill having to do with better educational opportunities in the city of St. Louis. Well, this is really all-encompassing. It's secondary schools, it's community colleges, universities, job training programs. These are the things that actually create opportunities for people and remove them from the criminal legal system, and they require investment. And then fourth, community spaces that are free and open to all. People who are living on the streets could tell you that they are criminalized often just for existing in the city of St. Louis and being in places where they're not allowed. What we need is a deeper investment in community spaces that actually take care of people, and again, people that are sometimes in crisis. So all of this requires investment. Can I see the next slide? Yes. All of this requires investment. And so part of what we're saying is that $16 million right now is going to the workhouse. $16 million per year is going to the workhouse. And if we expand it out to talk about the police and court and prosecutor support for systems like the workhouse, that number just balloons. What we're calling for is a divestment from those kinds of systems, a divestment from the workhouse, and investment in conditions of opportunity, investments in public safety, public defenders, affordable housing, parks and streets, and community-based mental health. This, of course, is just a mock-up of some of the things that we think should be in this ideal budget. But what we know is that it should look a lot different than it does right now, and we need to take some of the focus away from arrest and incarcerate and put it into these investments in community well-being. So thank you for listening, and that concludes our presentation.
If they can come up, we can take, at this point, questions from members of the committee. Alderman Boyd, any questions?
Sure. Thank you for putting together the report. It certainly is eye-opening. I have several questions. What was alarming was 291 days of average stay. I'm kind of curious if there's a mean day. Is there a mean? Like, how many days is the mean is that smaller?
Yeah, so
'Cause
my
that's a
understanding
lot
is
of
that is
days.
the mean. That's the average. That's not a max. The average stay is 290.
Right, but the mean is different than the average. No, the average is an average of 100 people scored a certain score on a test. And so you average that by, dividing by 100. But a mean may put more people scoring around 50 to 65. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think you mean the mode. I don't know what the mode number of days
Okay.
is, yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
'Cause I would hate to think that the average person truly stays. I mean, I understand averages, but that's incredible. That's a lot of days in jail.
Yeah.
Also, 44% of the cases were basically not guilty or amended. I'm curious as to, give me an example of how it was amended, and do you have data that shows what percentage was actually not guilty versus amended?
So specifically, that's just for our cases. St. Louis the problem is with St. Louis is that unfortunately these cases are long-standing. So that's 44% of the 1,100 of the people that we bailed out. So pretty much what it looks like is that either the case has been completely dismissed or the case has settled because they didn't have the discovery. I'm not sure necessarily what we got by amended, but that's what we got at Bail Project.
Okay, because I think what's also would be telling for me is actually how many were not guilty of all the cases. Do you have that particular data, though?
Yeah, we do have that data. I just have to.
Okay. I'd be curious if you could, share it with the chairperson. Also, out of curiosity, because I know those who are out and they're, suffering from substance abuse, sometimes they repeat again. I mean, I'm finding when they pick up individuals for prostitution and other smaller crimes, they do make the bail, they come right back out and they reoffend for the same reason last week that they were sent to jail. What percentage of those you've provided bail for reoffended prior to the original court date that you initially gave bail for?
Yeah, so the rough numbers, I don't know exactly, but I think I would say the lower half, so maybe like 35 to 45% of our clients have actually reoffended.
And how do you work with them? So you've put up whatever amount for bail this week, and then you find that 2 weeks later, they're back incarcerated. How do you handle that system?
Yeah, so the goal is not just to bail them out. The goal is also to connect them to other vital resources. And so literally what we do is that once we post bail, we connect them to one of our strategic partners that can help them just restore what they lost. Other part of that is we also help with substance abuse. We connect them to a substance abuse resource center that allows them to, get back on their feet. But I don't know the percentage exactly, no.
But tell me.
So I think you're asking a really important question, which really goes to the heart of this. The people are being rearrested and reoffending, as you said, because they have substance abuse issues. And we're not doing anything right now to help them deal with those substance abuse issues. So the money and investment that we're putting into locking them up, of course, to your point, will only lead to them being locked up again and again and again. And part of what we're saying is we need a different system that deals with people who have substance abuse issues so that they actually get treatment, so that they're not just funneling through the criminal legal system time and time again. So it's a huge problem, and it's a problem that's exacerbated by the current system that puts all of the money into punishing those people and not at all into treating them.
Right, that's why I'm excited about what the circuit attorney is attempting to do with, trying to give them a second chance before actually giving them a case. But I'm still curious as to within your system, so if someone reoffends, now they need bail again. How do you handle that? That's what I'm trying to get to.
I think we're almost looking at this the wrong way. For example, if someone is arrested for stealing something or writing a bad check or selling drugs because they need money to feed their family. If the idea behind what we're trying to do is, if we take that $16 million that we're using to fund the workhouse and locking people up, if we take a portion of that money and fix the problem that is causing them to have to steal in the first place, that itself is the cure. Fixing the root of the problem is the cure. So if we can just get the money out of the workhouse and reinvest it in the education programs, the job programs, the mental health services, the child care programs and things like that, that would keep people from having to commit a crime to survive, then that fixes the problem, and all of this is a moot point.
No, I'm extremely clear, and I'm very supportive of what you're doing. I'm still not getting an answer to the question. I mean, because I get it. We need to put them in a system where they can get the mental health, where they can get the job training, where they can get everything you're talking about, which is very exciting. That is the direction we should be moving into. But I'm just curious as to if a person reoffends and he needs bail again, what do you do? How do you help that person?
Yeah, we post a bail. We
just
operate under the presumption of innocence. These
Okay.
people are innocent until they're guilty of a crime, right?
Okay.
So we post a bail. Yeah, we don't make any distinctions like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be clear with that. Thank you. And Ms. Pardo, is it right? Pardo. I just wanted to, say I'm really sorry. Your story is very touching, and I hope we have made some changes since then. And I will hope many people do not have to experience what you have experienced.
Well, the workhouse is still open right now. There's someone who is about to go to lunch who's going to have to pick roaches out of their food. There's someone right now who doesn't have access.
You had to come up to them.
There's someone right now, there's women right now who don't have access to feminine hygiene products, women who don't have access to their attorneys, women who are locked up away from their children. Like, what are we going to do right now?
Right, and this is where I want to go with my next question. So that was about 2 years ago, your experience, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, is there anyone with the group that has done a tour, that have gone back to the workhouse to see if there's any changes that have been implemented? Because I know you've been working on this for quite some time. Are there any changes that you've seen? Are we making any incremental steps toward fixing some of the problems, besides just saying, because we can't just say shut down the workhouse. I mean, that is not something that we could do absolutely. It's a process, and I think that is something that we should work on, changing the system so that we have less people in the workhouse.
I was in the workhouse 2 years ago, March of 2016. Some of the members of our campaign who were just in the workhouse last month say nothing has changed. And unfortunately, when the Board of Aldermen, or the few times that a reporter can get access to the workhouse to do a tour, they're taking on the VIP tour. They don't take you to the places where the rats and the roaches are. They don't take you to the place where there's a foot of standing water. They don't show you the mold growing on the walls and things like that. You get to see the VIP tour where the commissioner's face is painted on a mural in between Dick Gregory and Maya Angelou. Those are the things that VIPs get to see on the tour of the workhouse. But per the members of our campaign, the people who were just recently bailed out of the workhouse, nothing has changed.
Okay, thank you. The last question, because I know other members of the committee have it. Because we're the legislative body, and we have a role, so we're certainly a stakeholder, but I guess the circuit attorney's office would be really where some of this kind of starts. What is your conversation like with the circuit attorney, and do you see any hopefulness in the circuit attorney changing that paradigm moving forward?
So yes, so one of the things you'll see in that report is that there are three primary targets, as we call them. The mayor's office, the Board of Aldermen, and the circuit attorney's office. So she is specifically identified as one of the people for whom we have particular demands. And most of those are around pretrial detention, cash bail policies. Because, again, 98% of the people in the workhouse are pretrial, and they're there on a cash bond that they can't afford to pay. So you're absolutely right to say the circuit attorney's office could do a tremendous amount around that. And we are advocating with her office just like we are here, just like we are with the mayor. I think there's been some suggestion recently that she's reviewing her office's bail policies. There hasn't been any formal shift in those policies as of yet, so we're continuing to advocate on that. I do want to pick up on one thing you said before, which is that we can't just close the workhouse. I just don't think that's true. I think it's actually quite feasible to close the workhouse. If you look at the numbers of people that are in between the workhouse and the City Justice Center right now, it would only really take 400 to 500, a reduction of 400 to 500 people between those two facilities to have them all only in the City Justice Center. This isn't a seismic shift, and if we had a serious review of our policies around pretrial detention, we could get there quite easily. We could defund this place next week. So it really is a matter of the will to do it, not the practicality of it.
So, and let's be clear, when I said we can't just shut the workhouse, I'm saying like next week we can't just shut down the workhouse. And what I said was it would take a process. And so I certainly appreciate, what you're saying, because you're absolutely right. If there's a way that, to let some out because it's a small offense, then let's move in that direction. So I'm with you on that. I just want to make it clear. People keep saying shut it down. And it seems like we could just do it next week. And again, we're just a legislative body, and everything's a process. That's all I'm saying.
Sure, and I think what we have in the report is exactly the steps that we think need to be taken to get there. And I don't know, we could have a conversation about how long we think that should take, but I would submit to you, I don't think it should take that long if we're serious about taking those steps.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciate it.
You're complete? Alderman Vaccaro, any questions? Okay. Alderman Ornowitz?
Nothing at this time,
Alderwoman Hubbard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I definitely thank you all for coming in. Like most of my colleagues, the presentation, had some alarming things in it, and I'll just be open and honest and say that I know definitely from my perspective, we're not green to really what's going on with these situations. I mean, like, I have an in-depth history with the workhouse. My mother worked there for like 30 plus years, and as a kid, we frequented the hallways and the dorms, and even back then, I don't remember those conditions being that bad. So it's been some time since I've taken a tour, but I want us to be open and honest about really what those conditions are there. I mean, there are correctional standards. I was a prison guard at Missouri Eastern Correctional Center where it would be 2 officers to 264 inmates, and that was a level 4 facility, and conditions weren't that bad because there are some standards. So I'm concerned. I do know that we definitely need to make some changes, but I mean, even from a different perspective, when I was a probation and parole officer at 7th Central, we would see clients at the workhouse, and there is a need for situations when you have people violate parole or probationers do stuff. I mean, so we do need a place to house those people when that type of stuff comes about. But I just want us to be open and honest about really what's going on at the workhouse. I'm definitely saddened by the things that you experienced while you were there, but we definitely need to make some changes, but we just need to figure things out, and it's not as simple as just close the workhouse. I mean, I understand the whole spectrum of criminology and criminal justice. All of my background, I have a master's degree in criminology and criminal justice, so I get it, every aspect of it, but we just need to be open and not shock anybody into making a decision, but just make sure that we definitely make some changes in the right direction, but take a holistic approach in how we deal with it. So I thank you all for coming. This is something that I think as a city we definitely need to look into, but it takes time, and it's not something that we can fix overnight. And thank you all for coming again.
Alderman Coulter?
Thank you, Chairman. I guess I had a couple of questions, some piggybacking off of what Alderman Boyd was asking about. These are probably best for Blake, but whoever wants to answer them. I wanted to start with where I think, Blake, where you may be left off, talking about if we closed one facility, close the workhouse, for example. Obviously, we've got the Justice Center and the workhouse. Currently, my understanding is the Justice Center is for more violent, folks accused of violent felonies or with, I guess, particular needs that they can't be housed in the workhouse. So looking at your chart on page 15 here, and you alluded to this, is the vast majority of the folks in the workhouse are incarcerated pretrial for low-level felonies, C-level felonies mostly, you know, I would suspect.
Can you
well,
tell me what page that is?
15.
I'm gonna follow you. Thank you.
And then you've got a very helpful breakdown of what C-level felonies they're in for, most of which are drugs. And I think, you know, that's where I would be focusing my efforts. I would be all for ending cash bail for nonviolent felonies, such as drug-related offenses. But so if you get rid of those, if you got everybody out of the workhouse that is currently incarcerated on just, let's just go with that 35%, those drug charges. Do we have enough space in one facility then to house everybody in the Justice Center, or are we going to create a situation where we're just going to create inhumane conditions in the Justice Center now?
Well, so I guess there's a couple parts to that.
It's a loaded question.
You're making me do math on the 35, and on the top of my head, I'm having trouble doing that. What I know is that the capacity of the City Justice Center would allow for housing of all of the people in the city of St. Louis that are detained if you reduced the total population by that 400 or 500 number. Whether that's 35%, I don't have that number fresh in my head.
So if we reduce, without percentages, if we reduce the pre-trial jail population by 400 to 500, we could get by with one facility the size of the Justice Center.
That's right, but I also want to make a larger point, because there's a few different pieces to this problem. One is about the conditions in the workhouse. You've heard a lot about that.
Right.
Another is about the particulars of why people are there, what crime they are accused of having committed. Again, accused, not
and believe me, Blake, I'm very familiar with that part. The part that I'm a member of the Board of Aldermen, right? So our purview is pretty limited. We fund the facility, right? We fund the Department of Public Safety. We have nothing to do with how a state circuit court judge sets a bond, what the prosecutor asks for. So that's going to be my next line of questioning is, looking at this, your chart on 15, the number of folks incarcerated in the workhouse for ordinance violations is minuscule to non-existent on this chart, and I don't know how old this data is. It's from 2018, it says.
Right.
So I'm all for getting rid of this building. I think it would be great if we could shift these resources elsewhere, but until there's a plan in place with the judges and the legislature, I don't see how we can do that, because what we'll be doing is we could close the building. It doesn't mean the judges are going to stop ordering bail, and then we'll just be overcrowding the Justice Center. So I'm hoping, and the circuit attorney as well, and I agree, she could specifically ask for no bail on half these cases she's issuing, which she's not doing, despite campaigning on that. So what I'd like to hear is, what are those conversations, what's happening specifically with the circuit attorney and with the legislature to try to resolve some of these state level issues, because I think your overcrowding is more of a state issue than a local issue. Here I think you find we're mostly supportive.
So you anticipated where I was going, but I hope you'll give me a second to finish. So the third thing I was going to say is that the other piece of this is really about the sort of public investment piece, which is why I spent so much time talking about the budget and didn't spend any time talking about the particulars of this data, because, as you said, you have no control over this. But what you do have control over is where the city funds are going for facilities like the Workhouse, for the Justice Center, or other priorities that are identified by this body. There's a reason that we have multiple targets. There's a reason that we're talking about the mayor and the circuit attorney's office. And trust me, when we talk to the circuit attorney, we're having a very different conversation than the one we're having with you. Because with her, she doesn't have anything to do with the budget. But she has a lot to say about the bail setting process, a lot to say about her office's requests for high bails on these cases. And that's the conversation we're having with her. But it does require all of those pieces to change. And some of what we've seen in this city is that when we talk to the mayor's office about this issue, they want to talk about the circuit attorney's office. When we talk to the circuit attorney, they want to talk about the Board of Aldermen. Everyone wants to talk about the judges. The truth is, all of those pieces are important here, and all of those institutions have a critical role to play in fixing this. So yes, the circuit attorney needs to review her policies and change her policies around bail. This body, I believe, needs to change the way that it's funding these systems, and the judges are political actors like anyone else and respond to the context that they're operating in. And I feel very strongly that if there was one jail in the city of St. Louis with certain capacity, you would see a different process in the courts around who's being ordered to jails on the basis of pretrial detention.
Got
I
it.
think Michelle wanted to add something.
If I could, just along those same lines, all those folks are obviously important to this process, and I see you're targeting them on your list. What about the legislature? Because, I mean, an easy fix would be the state legislature to get some, I guess, guidelines or parameters for what bail is appropriate or not appropriate, depending on offense levels and offenses. Is there any effort underway to address that? Anyone can take that.
Yes, I'll answer that. So actually, I meet with state legislators maybe once a month, and they are already having this conversation. This conversation is not new. It's actually kind of newer to St. Louis, but there's already states who have defeated cash bail, right?
Right.
And so it's becoming hot enough topic to where they're starting to adapt that this is obviously a problem, and that we have to do something with legislation along with that. So yes, my job, my part of the coalition is to talk to these legislators and start talking about an adequate system outside of cash bail.
Yeah, good.
And when that happens, we will also have to talk to, like Blake said, we have to talk to the judges and the prosecutors and everybody else. But cash bail is going to end. We see that. We predict that cash bail in 5 years won't exist. And so, yeah, we would have to do something with that.
Okay. I mean, I would just think maybe that would be a good place for some more resources of your all to be focused, considering the vast majority of the folks we're talking about here are incarcerated on state-level felony charges. And yes, I deal with the judges on a regular basis. They can be a difficult bunch to get them to change their mind, but one easy way to get them to change their habits and their mind is to pass a state law that they have to follow. So, preaching to us is wonderful. I think you'll find we're very supportive of this. And yes, I suppose we could just theoretically defund the building, but I don't think that's going to fix our problem in the short term unless we do get rid of cash bail for these low-level offenses and tackle that at the state level.
That's really encouraging news, in part because we were hoping that you would say you find we're generally supportive, even if it's a process. Long game, short game, the workhouse needs to be closed, as you heard Inez's testimony. What is also true is that when you make a law, and we've learned this from past movements, especially some of the mother movement of civil rights issues, when you create a law, you are not necessarily changing hearts. And so what we hope is a piece of what you've heard or what you experienced today is not only an agreement that you will look at this and take it seriously, but that you will begin to speak in ways that the words, yes, the workhouse should be closed, will be as prevalent, as normal as the workhouse is not so bad. There's a reason that that hit the press, because people in the city of St. Louis for whom you legislate, to whom you are responsible, are hearing your colleagues say the workhouse is not so bad. But what if the press got hold of the fact that someone on the Board of Aldermen thinks that the workhouse should be closed? Is there an agreement that you will begin to let this truth come out of you when you're interviewed? Is there an agreement that you understand your moral influence, your societal, your community influence? It's obvious that the legislation that you pass is part of how you became alders in the first place. But there's another reason that you were elected. You are social people. You are upheld to and beholden to a society. And the people in your neighborhood and the people on your blocks that are looking to you to define public safety want to know how you personally and as a committee define public safety. So maybe what we're leaving out here and what I should have made clear is that you have authority that doesn't just sit in legislative books. You have authority that comes out of who you are as a human, because you have the power to say that everyone should be treated humanely. I really believe that the same way the press gets hold of and the way the civil rights movement pushed for laws that were already in place to be upheld in the community, you have the power to do that simply by saying that the state legislature or the way the judges do things here has to change. So don't humble yourselves too much. You actually have more power than you may think.
Nothing further. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, guys.
Alderman Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. This was really informative. I think a lot of times when we hear close the workhouse, there's not a lot of information presented, and it's easy to dismiss those statements because we also hear from constituents whose attacker is in the workhouse or whose abuser is in the workhouse. And so hearing those comments without real information behind them, again, is easy to dismiss. So having this is really, really helpful. I appreciate the vast amount of information that we've been presented with today. My question really to you is, what can the Board of Aldermen, what can the legislative body actually do to move forward towards a city where we don't have a functioning workhouse? I guess to the point of my colleague from the 7th, we can't control the cash bail system, but certainly you're coming before us with an ask. What is your ask for the legislative body to do to work towards a city that no longer has a workforce, a workhouse?
We are asking you to look at the budget. That's our first, foremost. And obviously, there's stuff laid out here that we're actually saying the Board of Alders can do. So there is the budget piece. There's also what I just said, which is to say, if you have agreement, if you believe that the workhouse should be closed, will you say that publicly? And will you say whether or not you're going to show up in a line with the campaign and wear a sticker and put a button on your backpack? Will you say that the workhouse should be closed? Next, we are asking you to look at public safety as community well-being. Currently, public safety in the city of St. Louis is the invisibility of the poor. And to believe that poverty should be criminalized is literally to be so far behind the times that you are trapped in racist capitalism in a way that says, I have to spend money to pretty a place by making sure poor people are so invisible that they're criminal. And so we're asking for a different move. We're asking for a shift that says addiction is not an offense, that says reoffending does not mean re-addicting, because addiction becomes something that you're budgeting for differently. Does that make sense?
It does, and I appreciate that. I think for me, one of the concerns I have is what echoed from one of my colleagues here, is that if we were to close the workhouse, say, the Board of Aldermen were to eliminate the budget line item for the workhouse entirely and just eliminate it, and it's closed. Without a change in the system, without a change in the actions of the judges, what would happen to all the people that the judges are putting there? And would we then create inhumane conditions in the Justice Center? And how can we develop a plan that first addresses some of the other issues? I'd like to help work towards a plan where we can start to address some of those nonviolent offenders, very easily move them into a system. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Divesting from the workhouse is the first step. That's part of why we're here. Now, we understand that Kim Gardner's office, the mayor's office, and the Board of Alder people, or Board of Alder people, have to work. It's the cogs in a wheel. Everybody has to do their part in order for this plan to take place, but it could literally start here. I can't speak for everyone else, but I want the board to be courageous and take the step of saying, okay, we are cutting the budget for the workhouse in half. Cut it down to $8 million. Put pressure on the circuit attorney's office to actually do the things that she said she was going to do as the circuit attorney. And by cutting the budget, you can do that.
If we cut the budget by half and no other changes were made, wouldn't the conditions there become even more inhumane?
So Blake had answered that same question, and that wasn't satisfactory. Can you point to
But-
where his response was?
Yeah, I mean, part of, I think, we're sort of getting into like kind of game theory here of how this plays out. I mean.
But these are real human lives.
Of course,
And if
please,
we
trust
were
me.
to functionally, I think we're all looking for solutions here, very earnestly. But I would hate to be responsible for a situation in which we cut the budget by half, as suggested, and no other changes were made, and we were bold, and we were alone in our boldness.
So let me answer your question. For the first part of your question about what is it we're asking the Board of Aldermen to do, later I'll point you to, later I'll point you to page 37, 38 of the report, which specifically talks about the request for the Board of Aldermen. There are 3 pieces to that. First, divesting from the workhouse. Second, passing a resolution committing to closing the workhouse. And then third, reallocating the general fund money going to the workhouse now to invest in community well-being. So there are some details around that in the report. But to this broader question of how the sort of steps that it plays out, to Michelle's point, I think part of what we're saying here is like somebody's got to be first. And everyone can look at another piece of this system and say, well, if they don't do X, it won't have the ultimate result. And that's true. But the full scope of political history shows that once some pressure is applied in one part of the system, it tends to impact another part of the system. And so what I feel very confident about is if this body took real affirmative steps to divest from an institution like the workhouse, other institutions, the judiciary, the circuit attorney's office, the mayor's office, maybe even the state legislature, I'm less confident about them, will respond in their own way to make possible the change that you've already put into law.
So I've only ever taken the VIP tour there, and I can't imagine having experienced some of the things that you've experienced that were described here today. But if the judges and the circuit attorney and all of the other cogs in the wheels haven't felt compelled to change the system with the current situation being as bad as it is, if we were to make it worse, do we really think that they would be somehow suddenly compelled to change? Even as it's as bad as you say it is now, they're not compelled. But if we make it worse, they will be?
I can't
mean-
imagine the workhouse being any worse than it is at this very moment with $16 million. I strongly believe that if the Board of Aldermen are bold and courageous and they say, we're not going to continue investing in a facility that is inhumane and humans should not live there, and saying that we are going to cut the budget, I strongly believe that the circuit attorney's office will have no other choice but to stand on the promises she made when she ran for circuit attorney 2 years ago, when she said she was going to stop prosecuting low-level crimes, when she said she was going to stop arresting people for low-level drug offenses, when she said she was going to do all of these things. Right now, she has no reason to. There's plenty of space to continue locking black and brown people up. But if the board takes a stand and says, we are not going to do this anymore, I believe that the circuit attorney's office will get on board. And it's my understanding that it's not necessarily the judges that are making the decisions about what bail is. They are going off the recommendation of the circuit attorney's office. If the circuit attorney requests a $25,000 bail, the judges have been like, okay, yeah, sure. So if we cut the budget, it forces the circuit attorney's office to do what it is that they said they were going to do, and then that also allows the mayor to get on board.
Mr. Chairman, my fear would be that we could be potentially making the situation worse. But I think it would be a worthy endeavor to engage the circuit attorney's office in a conversation, perhaps in a hearing, where we could explore this concept collectively so that we don't have to take a first step that could endanger further the lives of people, but rather come to a collective conclusion that we could work together and decide that we could take the step together, which is the ideal solution.
Yeah, I would think that since they've identified 3,
Sure.
that we may also need to have either the mayor or somebody
Sure.
from the mayor's
Yes.
office all at the same time in a conversation on this.
I would
issue.
agree. I mean, I think that we could force a hand, but the consequences of not having the follow-through on other ends would be disastrous.
Right.
But I think this is something this committee could work forward, and I would certainly support those actions.
Yeah, and I think that this committee would
Sure.
be interested in being the catalyst for that collective
Absolutely.
discussion. And I think that may be more the route that the committee can go at this point. You know, the way the city works, this board could cut it out, but E&A could stick that thing back in there. And so if we don't have them at the table, then we could end up pretty much at the same spot and not making the moves we want. So I think that in that regard, we might even have somebody represented from the comptroller's office. Everybody in E&A plus this committee might be the way to go.
I think we should invite the judges and their staff to
Yes,
participate.
Yes. So, okay then.
May we continue discussions or hold you to that, and you'll be in touch about pursuing that?
Say that again now.
So this hearing meeting is something that we can expect to move towards and receive a similar presentation from our campaign?
Yeah, and every, this entire meeting is being recorded and will be online, presumably in the next 24 hours.
And so when we come back and report that the Bail Project has in fact now decarcerated, doing the city's job for her by decarcerating people from the workhouse and other places to the point where there are few enough people in the workhouse for it to close, perhaps we can move even forward and again remind this board of the strong moral influence that you have in St. Louis.
I think what you're hearing from the committee is a general consensus to try to lead the way for that discussion. Am I correct on that so far? Right. And I think that's the commitment you can get, that this committee is interested in leading that and moving towards that discussion and bringing everybody to the table. Okay? All right. Did that complete all you had, Alderwoman?
That is all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Muhammad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this call 100%. I was in our city jails not too long ago, and the Bail Project was responsible for getting me out. Here I am, a sitting alderman in the city jail. And I seen the way, I was treated a little nicely more than others, but I seen the way people were treated. And I seen the conditions that we were in, both the Workhouse and the Justice Center. I don't think the Justice Center looks any better, honestly. Some new paint, that's about it. But I support this plan 100%. I actually believe that as the legislative body for the city, there are things that we can do and steps we can take to close the workhouse. I think it's all about if we're willing to do it, and if we're willing to take the heat for doing it. And as we talk about a transition plan from moving inmates from the workhouse to some other facility, hell, if it was up to me, I'd just burn the thing down and tell everybody to go home. Again, people are in there for the wrong reason, not being able to pay traffic tickets or some other low-level offense. We need to do things differently. This is a great plan. I support it. If you got a button, give it to me so I can put it on now.
Mr. Mohammed, you have no idea how it touched my heart to hear you say that. Because from the very first moment I joined this campaign, I have always said, I am settling for closing the workhouse down. What I really want to do is burn it down and salt the earth. So to hear you say that just affirmed me in so many ways. Whew. I'm sorry, I just needed to tell you that.
Okay. Alderwoman Boyd, any questions?
I don't have any questions. I just have comments because I was listening to you guys, and it's real apparent that closing the workhouse is one thing, but at the end of the day, and I don't think anybody's paying attention, social services money is just diminished. And so that's where the dollars should be. And all I can see is, and I'm reaching way back, is St. Louis Caring Communities, because they had a wraparound service, and so they reduce the crime and the incarceration into those communities because they targeted the whole family. But as this young lady experienced, I experienced, and I wasn't a legislator, I was in jail. And what was so deep was they conveniently lost me. And my father could not find me. And it took him days to locate me. So I understand what she went through. And I understand the VIP treatment with the workhouse. And that's norm. You know, they're not going to show you the bad part. but realistically, I experienced some of what she experienced. And ironically, I know a young lady, and I feel real strong that the judges, the circuit attorney, the mayor, and the police should be in this talk, because all of them are playing the role to locking us up. And so mine was minute for expired license plates. And so I was on my way to work at 4 o'clock in the morning. So can you imagine the police pull you over and say, oh, you got a warrant, we're gonna have to lock you up. So it didn't make a difference, I was on my way to work. So I mean, I missed work. I had 3 kids. I had a father that was panicking, trying to find me, and they were just bouncing me from place to place till I finally got in the workhouse. And my dad was like, I've been looking for you for 3 days. And nobody could find me, nobody knew me, nobody knew my name. And that was the most horrific experience I had ever dealt with in my life. I had never dealt with anything like that. So I relate to what you went through. But I think what bothered me more so, I was scared to eat. I was scared to take anything, and I had the most excruciating headache in my whole life. So I was scared because I didn't know what they were going to do to me. So I agree, we do need to close it, but we need to plan it out to make sure that those people that are let out, they have an out. I don't want people just to be on the street. And again, there's no services to help those people. So we have to start looking beyond right now and saying, okay, where are these people going to go? How are they going to be housed? What are they going to do as far as working? What mental health issues are we going to address? What drug issues are we going to address? So it's a big circle that we have to fill, and I just feel we need to add these people to it because they need to be a part of this process. So then my question, this is the book you gave us before? Okay. Is this the same book? Okay, because I have read it, I kept saying I saw some of this before, that's why I was asking. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that. I just want to point out that one of the things that's in that book, and it can be fleshed out a lot more, are some ideas about building out that social service component that you're talking about. And I think there's a lot more to be said about exactly what that looks like, but I really appreciate that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Alderman Boyd? Another question?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question as I'm looking. Blake, I have to ask you this question. It talks about the participatory budget process.
Oh, yep.
Did you participate in that when the Ways and Means had public hearings about their budget?
Did I personally?
Mhm.
No.
Was anybody on your project, did they participate in bringing forward? Okay, someone did in the back.
Yeah, Mike Tinker was there, wasn't he?
Okay, would you come forward for me, please?
I think he was.
I saw somebody.
Because I think it's very important that we don't just have this presentation, but we really make meaningful steps toward improvement moving forward. So I'm curious to know, do you feel like your voice was heard during that process?
Absolutely. I mean, there was a venue specifically for public testimony. The only difference in the process we're recommending is that participants would actually have an opportunity to guide where funds would go. So it wouldn't just solely be held by this body, but you'd actually project your power to the people that are actually directly affected. So they would actually help decide what kind of projects or policies the money would be invested in.
Okay, so you would be suggesting that a group of citizens would have a pot of money to make recommendations on how it should be allocated?
Exactly.
Okay. The other question is, because I want to make it clear, sometimes people think the Board of Aldermen as a legislative body has some kind of superpowers, and we really don't. We have to follow a process as well. And it's kind of a misnomer that we really have control of the city's budget. And I think the chairman kind of mentioned that earlier, because in your report, it talks about the Board of Aldermen must reallocate the general fund to invest in community well-being for all of the city of St. Louis. Here's how the process works for us. So you sit on the Ways and Means Committee, and you can make recommendations. And the only authority that we have is being able to take away. So we can take away all the money for the workhouse, for example. But at the end of the day, that budget goes back to ENA, which is the comptroller, the mayor, and the president of the Board of Aldermen. And they do what they want to with it. And then it comes back to the Board of Aldermen. We don't have a choice. We have a deadline by June 30th to pass a budget. We could decide we're not going to sign on to anything that's in that budget. And after June 30th, it passes the way ENA created it. So we don't even get a chance, and I wish we could change that system, because I think it's pretty flawed, because a lot of people, you know, kind of give us that responsibility of having some type of control of the budget, and we really do not. And I really, truly think we should have more control and more say-so of the city budget, but that would be a charter, you know, revision in order for us to do that. So I just want to make it very clear, because it sounds like it's real simple. The Board of Aldermen can reallocate and do all this stuff, because we have tried it, and we have done it since the 15 years I've been here, and ENA have made their adjustments, and then we pretty much get stuck with almost going along with it, or just voting against the budget.
Right. No, we absolutely agree and fully understand that, but we also see in you the most direct venue for democracy. You are literally the voices of your ward. You are literally the voices of folks that are directly impacted by this. So we're asking in this space for you to actually stand up and be champions on this issue. And if we need more discussion, more education, we're willing to actually hold whatever spaces are needed. But we recognize that you can actually come up with a full plan and say what you want to do, and other elements within the city structure can subvert that plan, which means we actually need, in this case, to co-conspire with you to make this real.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, part of, you know, I was at the Saturday Ways and Means Committee meeting that had the public testimony, and hearing these presentations, they didn't have this lengthy presentation, but hearing them talking about it gave me the energy to bring them before the Public Safety Committee, both on revisioning public safety and then specifically on the issue of closing the workhouse. And as you know, it's some of us on this committee that started the whole process of having a public hearing on the budget to begin with. And we did that as a way to really get people involved, but to hear the ideas from people and see what ways we can enact some of those ideas. So this is how you ended up here, because we wanted to hear it in more detail based upon just the general thing that was stated at the hearing on that Saturday related to the budget. Are there any other questions from members of the committee or other comments? Are there any closing remarks you'd like to make? Or you're fine? Okay, then we're, all right. Well, we appreciate your coming.
Thank you.
We may ask you back for some more information.
Please do.
And even for some continued work with you. So we appreciate you coming. Thank you very much. That is all of the agenda item today, and therefore our committee meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.